All right, good morning, everybody. If you could find a seat, we'll get this party going. A lot of new faces. It's always fun to see new faces, and it's always equally as fun to see the regulars that come in every week. So thank you for being here on this Wednesday. My name is Phoebe Bensmer. I'm one of the four that helps facilitate the Montrose Forum along with Kathy Hebers, Barbara Bynum, and Judy Ann Files. And we all like to sit on this side of the room. Apparently we do that every week, but that's fine. That's kind of like church, is where you sit. So yeah, welcome to Forum. Always you can bring a friend. We try to bring some very informative talks where you leave the meeting today, you're having learned something that you can go out and share with people and your friends, and they'll say, wow, that's a cool deal. I think I would like to go to the Forum with you. Please bring them. So our speaker today is Jace Hochwalt. Hochwalt, yeah. He has been with the City of Montrose for almost a year. He holds the job as our planning manager. A little bit about Jace before I turn the microphone over to him. Like I said, he's been with the city for almost a year. He and his wife are having their first baby in about 2.5 weeks. So I know. So your hair's not gray yet. You're still looking young. So I was kidding him before. I said, so if you get a call, you're out of here. And he said, yeah, I'm out of here. So I think we can get through the next hour. So I'm hopeful. Yeah. Earlier this year, the City of Montrose asked the public to do their own sign on with a QR code and do a City of Montrose housing need assessment. They asked a broad variety of questions. Jace was actually here at the Forum, which we kind of stepped outside our normal box and gave him a couple minutes at the end of a Forum presentation to appeal to you to go online and do that city survey. So you have an opinion and you have some skin in the game as to what's happening and how you feel it's happening, and why are there apartment buildings that I hear are going in my backyard where they may or may not be. But it's a crunch time for all cities everywhere, and Montrose feels it as much as any other city. So he has a preliminary, most of the study from this housing needs assessment that he'll go over with you. As always, you're welcome to ask questions, but please hold them till the end so I can get a microphone to you and so that everybody can hear your question, and Jace will answer your question. There are some city employees here that you guys just raise your hand. Yeah, Ben, you're here as well. And Will, thanks for always filming this for us. The Forum meetings go on the City of Montrose Facebook page. So if you want to, YouTube page, sorry. So if you want to see them again, it's so fascinating, which actually some of them are. I've actually gone home and watched them again. That you can watch it there. So hold your questions to the end. I'm sure you'll have them. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Jace from the City of Montrose. Thanks for coming, Jace.
Well, thanks, Phoebe. Yeah, as Phoebe mentioned, we have been going down the road with this housing needs assessment for several months now, actually. So this was initiated before I started, or right when I started, I should say. This was back in about September of last year that we realized we really needed a study that identified some gaps in our housing and identified really what we need moving forward and how we're going to grow moving forward. Projection, one thing I'll caveat on the front end, again, this is preliminary. The final report should come out in about 3 weeks or so. As far as demographics go and growth goes, everybody's projections are different. That's no different from what you're going to see here today. And those projections are still being refined a bit. With that said, so what we did was we contracted or consulted with Points Consulting. It's a group out of Moscow, Idaho. I actually grew up in Pullman, Washington, and I know Ben actually went to school in Moscow, Idaho, so actually somewhat familiar with that area. Moscow is about the size of Montrose, about 20,000 in the Idaho Panhandle area. But contracted with them to do this study, and like I said, just about probably 3 weeks from the final product. I'm here today instead of with the final product because, as Phoebe indicated, I'm having a child soon, and I wanted to get this out before I had to leave maybe a little too soon. So You're going to see a lot of data on these slides, probably a lot of questions at the end, so just kind of keep those in mind as we go. So Points Consulting typically would give this presentation and they give their pitch here on them. I'm not going to do that too much here. I'm just going to go, I'll just kind of mention that what they do is they focus on smaller communities, more rural communities or smaller cities. And this is kind of a good example of that. Lewiston, Idaho, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, Wenatchee, Washington, Frankfort, Kentucky. These are towns and small cities that are really kind of right in the threshold of what the size of Montrose is. They don't focus on larger cities. That's just not their bread and butter. So they're well versed and experienced with communities of our size. Here's the timeline. I kind of covered it a little bit on the front end, but as mentioned, we started this back in September of last year. You're probably looking at this and saying, "Hey, what's with this? We should be done by now." This is the projected timeline on the front end. We had a little bit of staff turnover at city staff. Points Consulting actually had a little bit of staff turnover on the front end of this project too. But the biggest thing is we actually held our community outreach open quite a bit longer through February. So as Phoebe indicated, we had this housing needs community survey that was pushed out. We kept that open for 6 weeks and we had a really robust response on that, actually phenomenal. I'll go over that a little bit later, but it was over 1,200 responses. It was by far the best response rate Points Consulting has ever seen, and really phenomenal rates just from a statistics standpoint. But all that said, again, what we're looking at is just a couple more weeks, so just be patient with us as we finish up. Big picture on housing. So I was in the city of Grand Junction for four and a half years. I moved in 2018, and I was kind of right when things launched. This is, in my eyes, when the Western Slope as a whole was finally found. And I shouldn't say finally, I think it's always been known, but I think that's the year that kind of really kicked things off. That being said, I'll go over kind of a little bit of the national side of things. So all in all, households are getting smaller. My demographics having less kids, and it's getting, generally speaking, getting older. Communities like Montrose in particular, we have a very large retirement community. That's kind of a national trend, and we're certainly not much different from that. Parcels are getting smaller, homes are getting bigger. This is just a kind of a standard we've seen in change over the last 20 or so years. One big thing, everyone's heard it, inflation. Inflation's been really a huge issue in the last couple of years, supply-demand issues. You can talk to Jim and he can give you everything about all infrastructure projects that we deal with and the supply chain issues that we've seen. Renewed interest in land use policies in many states. What that's really referring to is a lot of states are actually from a state level, kind of a top-down level, actually enacting some certain strategies, legislation, things like that. Colorado is doing that right now as we speak. They're actually in a session, and they will be over the next 4 or 5 days that could have some drastic changes. I'm not going to go too much into those because they evolve, quite frankly, every single day. But there's some land use control that they're looking at. The state of Oregon, state of Washington, they have very similar kind of growth management approaches. I actually am from Washington, so I have a little bit of familiarity with that. Let's see. So what we're seeing is, as far as income levels, you're seeing kind of some pretty interesting dynamics. You have, again, kind of the haves and the have-nots, and the middle is kind of getting crunched. That's just how things have gone over the last couple of years, and that affects housing drastically. For single-family residences in particular, detached homes, they're getting more expensive. It's just pushing a lot of people out. And there's not a whole lot of other products for them to even buy or build equity on. So that kind of certainly creates issues. And then COVID. What did COVID do? Well, we've seen COVID just exacerbate growth on the Western Slope and in Montrose. We've seen a lot more tourism. Certainly that's been huge, and we just overheated in general. People had more money to spend, so you see them travel a bit more. You see housing prices go up, and that's really what's been reflected. And then market slowdown. This is kind of the question mark. Have we seen it here? We actually have a little bit. I was talking with our building official this morning. Our building permits, first through April of this year, are down 50% compared to last year. Now, what's the cause of that? Probably interest rates. That's probably the biggest thing. We still have a housing shortage here. We recognize that. There's certainly a lot of demand that's there. With interest rates at 6.5%, that just creates issues. That basically, from a mortgage standpoint, you're paying about 40% more on a mortgage for the same priced home compared to the same time last year. Locally, what we're seeing, rapid in-migration. We're actually not seeing a whole lot of net migration or a net increase, meaning between deaths and births, there's actually a negative in that, but we're seeing a lot of people moving into this community. I'll cover a slide here in a little bit that shows that. Differences in culture and housing expectations. Cohorts on the extreme of income scale. This is a big one here. So again, you've got kind of the haves at the higher level, $800,000 plus homes. Some people are paying cash for those. I'll say I wish I had that disposable income. I do not. And then you have people that are making $40,000, $50,000 a year or less. You have medical assistants working at the hospital that are making just trying to make ends meet. And those are some of the most sought after, most needed jobs in this community. And they're really tough to find housing for those positions just because they just don't quite make enough. Highly specific zoning code, we'll go over that in a little bit. Strong residential growth combined with tepid economic growth. So we have seen tax revenue, retail sales tax revenues go up. There's no doubt about that. A lot of that's from tourism, generally speaking. But we've seen a lot of people buying second homes in this general area. I think that's a big thing that we've seen. Housing boom since 2016. Like I said, I moved in 2018 to the Western Slope. And yeah, that's spot on. I think 2016 was the start, 2018 was the launching, and then 2021 or 2020 just went insane. I don't really know how else to explain that. And then I'll cover the zoning code, or some of the zoning as well. Just for everyone's knowledge, Points Consulting probably gives a better explanation than me on some of these things, so keep that in mind. I'm not an economist, but I'm a planner, so. Just general housing terminology, single family means a freestanding, detached residential unit. This is a lot of what we see in the Montrose community, really primarily what we see. It's just your standard residence, and really what that is kind of the end of the scale here. You've got a yard, you've got just a standard house. Multifamily, that refers to apartment complexes, higher density types of dwellings, condominiums. We don't see a whole lot of condos here, primarily just due to some state legislation. But that's really what that refers to. The big kind of missed area is middle density. This is what Montrose is lacking. This is what the whole Western Slope is lacking, except you do see a little bit more maybe in Durango. But what this refers to is, a range of housing units between about 3 and 12 units per building. That can be really a duplex, triplex, quadplex. That can be townhomes. We're seeing more townhome development have over the last year or two, and that's basically just attached walls and things like that. I'll say, me being a little younger, that was the first house I could afford, was a townhome, an attached unit in Grand Junction that I purchased. And it gave me the ability to build up some equity, which was phenomenal. Unfortunately, even townhomes have soared in value over the last 2 years, and it's even pushed a lot of people, entry-level buyers, out of that market. But that is what is considered the missing middle. So if you hear that term, that's kind of what that refers to in terms of housing type. I don't want to confuse everybody on the zoning, so I'm going to cover this in about 2 minutes, high-level view here. We have 11 residential districts. That is a ton for a community of Montrose's size. Most communities of our size probably have about 6 to 7. And so it just means basically we have everything from rural living, RL, all the way up to R4, which is high density district. And then we have basically 10 other residential zoning districts in between that. So just generally speaking, it's a lot. So one thing to mention, and I actually covered it last night at City Council, so we are working on some zoning code amendments right now. And this is not drastic, this is not what you saw in Delta County, this is not what's happening in the city of Grand Junction. What we did, we have a fairly, say, archaic code right now. It doesn't read well. It's a patchwork of different sections that you just have to sift through. What we've done is consolidate that, and it'll really help us, it'll help the development community, it'll help the public just be able to navigate our zoning and development code. So that is what we're calling phase 1 of our kind of amendment process. Once this project comes out, we will likely carry into phase 2 and actually look at some more substantial changes, potentially with zoning, potentially with some other components I'll talk about here in a little bit. And then the redo districts. This is the downtown district, basically. This is, there's different zones within the redo, but the redo district allows for some things and some variances and flexibility that wouldn't be allowed elsewhere. So what that means is we allow for accessory dwelling units in the redo district in the downtown area. Those can be little cottages or kind of mother-in-law units, as I refer to them as. But that's something that's unique, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So this is probably the most interesting facet. One thing I'm going to say is, again, projection population growth is determined differently by all economists. But this is direct data. And so what you're seeing here, it's a little confusing, so I'll try to explain it as best I can. But what you're seeing here, these bars, the green bars, they refer to net change of migration. So that's people moving into town from outside of the city, from outside of the state. As you can see here, these are the top locations where people are moving from. What this, I think black, I'm not quite sure what that color is, what that refers to is the natural increase. And actually it is a natural decrease. What does that mean? I kind of referred to it earlier. We're having more deaths than births. We're having less younger people moving into town. We're having more older people moving into town. We're going through a shift as far as younger people actually having kids. I will say this, I looked at the cost of childcare, I looked at the other costs, and it is mind-blowing, and I get to deal with that here in about 2.5 weeks. So it'll be an exciting time for me, but it is the reality of kind of what my generation is facing right now in terms of, we also have a childcare desert. This is probably something you've heard if you saw anything from Maslow. We don't have enough childcare facilities to actually meet the demand, which is a real struggle. So all in all here, we are seeing growth in this community, but I think we're seeing it, and we have seen it since 2016. Net migration has just soared, whereas it actually in the past was decreasing, where we actually had a natural increase from our general population. We saw people leaving the area. Now it's flipped completely since 2016, where we're seeing people come into the area, but the residents are actually not, the residents that live here are actually not increasing in population. So all this to say, we've seen about 400 to 500 people move in per year since 2016, maintained that pace. COVID kind of kicked that, ramped that up a little bit. The big question is, will it continue? Will net in-migration keep going? I don't have an answer for that. I think time will tell. But I will say, I don't see this changing too much. And I think Points Consulting does not either, and that's why they are actually projecting a fairly low growth rate, which I'll show on the next slide, for the next 20 years here in Montrose. This is their forecast. So again, it's actually drastically different than DOLA's. DOLA is always on the high end. That's one thing to keep in mind. And as you can see, DOLA is this black line, and that refers to the Department of Local Affairs, and basically the state's projection. pretty steep. This has actually been ramped down a bit. It's actually about right here. I think they revised that just in the last last month or so. So they've actually revised theirs downward. They're always on the high end, like I mentioned. You saw this in housing studies back in like 2004, 2005. Everybody thought that line was just going to keep going. We almost saw no growth between about 2009 and 2016. Points Consulting, they're actually saying we're going to have a far lower growth rate. I'm not going to speak for them here today. They will explain all of their forecasting within their report, so I certainly encourage you to look at it. But what they're stating, kind of like this last slide here, is we've got an older population that's continuing to move here. That's what a lot of the net migration is here. And then we don't have really a natural increase. We're actually have a natural decrease. They forecast that to continue. So while we will still see growth over the next 20 years, we're going to see lesser growth. This is actually a trend that's kind of happening across the country. Again, because we have the baby boomer generation that's aging, and younger population is just not having any kids anymore. So I'm going to get into some slides that might look a little confusing, so I'll probably skip through some of these a little quicker and try to explain some of them as best I can. These are probably no surprise once you actually dig into the data, but what they show is that basically for your extremely low, very low, low income, you're almost always cost burdened or severely cost burdened. What severely cost burdened means is that you're paying over 50% of your income on housing. That's a lot. It's tough to live like that. I'll just put it that way. Cost burden refers to you paying more than 30% of your income on housing, and not cost burden refers to you paying less than 30%. So as you can see, for both owners and renters, you've got above median income, moderate income. Those people are generally doing okay. You're not cost burdened, or you might have some that are cost burdened in some way, but generally not a huge chunk. But as you get into the very low and extremely low, you're almost always in that realm. And it's not surprising at the end of the day when you see those probably, but it's something that we certainly want to take into consideration. Because these cost burdened and severely cost burdened, those are the people that need the most help when it comes to housing. Whether it's subsidies or just providing more housing units that they can either purchase or rent. Not going to get into too much detail on this because this kind of covers our zoning, but this shows it. We have 11 zoning districts. We have a ton of them, but we only have 2 that cover over 50% of our land area for residential zones. It's our R2 zone, which refers to low density district, and R3, which is medium density districts. Basically what it shows is those 2 just have, they're just a bulk of our land area. There's not a ton of difference between those. R3 means it's a little higher density. You can put a couple more houses per acre, technically. R2 is a little bit lower density, but generally speaking, R2 and R3 on the ground don't look too much different. And then, yeah, building space, again, no difference here. You're seeing a lot of vacant land that exists. So a lot of the zoned area is that a lot of the vacant land is within those zone districts. So that's where you're going to see the most buildings is in those zone districts. This is renter to owner. Basically what it reflects is what the percentage of the population rents compares to owns. We actually have a higher percentage that rents here in Montrose compared to the state, the county, the nation. Not too much higher, but that's something that we keep in mind. Is this because housing costs are so high and people can't actually afford to buy? Could be. I wouldn't be surprised if that plays a big role, because renter growth has actually increased, or that percentage has actually increased over the last 5 to 6 years. So I suspect that's probably certainly something that plays a factor. Housing permits. Myself and Archie Byers, the building official at the city, could nerd out all day long on these numbers, but it's really fascinating just to look at in this chart. So gold bar, City of Montrose, black is Montrose County. That's basically Montrose County outside of the city limits of Montrose. So 2010, so we had a huge boom back in 04, 05, 06. Started to see some decreases in 08, and then obviously we had the recession, and then basically stagnant, flatlined, less than 100 permits, both for the county and the city combined, all the way up until 2014. See a little bit of a pickup in 2015, 2016, 2017, and then 2018, boom. Right when Jace moves into the western slope, that's when it starts to take off. You're welcome. So it's interesting to see this, and I think that the million-dollar question is, will this continue? So we saw huge numbers in 2021, just shy of 300. 2022, those numbers aren't here, but those were, I want to say, I just looked at the numbers, I think 215 or so, give or take. And then this year, like I said, we are, I want to say, at 48 units. Last year at the same time, we had 98 units, so we were down 50% on the year. Again, will that continue? What is playing a role there? Likely interest rates, because the demand is certainly there. And how will those interest rates play out over the next 2 months, 4 months, 6 months? I have no idea. I know the Federal Reserve is meeting today, and it sounds like they're likely to bump up interest rates again. But will they pivot? I think time will tell. So these are some hotspot maps, just showing where you see kind of the clustered areas and the areas being most important. So up here we've got some, I think, modular manufactured housing that has been built. You've got Bear Creek up there, so we're seeing a lot of growth in that area. Over here we've got Waterfall Canyon, and then Copper Creek area. So we're seeing some hot spots, really where there's vacant land. That's basically what that's showing. And then this map is just showing multifamily. Really, where we've seen the most multifamily is Colorado Outdoors. So we've got David Dragoo back here that's more than familiar with the Base Camp Apartments. That's the biggest multifamily complex we've seen in probably about 50 years. We haven't had nearly any market rate apartments for quite some time, so that's something that will add to really the volume of multifamily. We're starting to see a lot of interest in multifamily. So some of you might be familiar with the residences at Dry Cedar Creek. That is a tax credit property that is adjacent to the east of the recreation center. That'll be 60 units of mixed income. So it's tax credit subsidized, but they will have different income ranges. So they'll have kind of a diversity of incomes within those 60 units. That is actually planned to start construction, I want to say in a couple of weeks. So pretty close there with their goal to have the project done by early to mid-year next year. Home values. Home values have skyrocketed. I've experienced this, just keeping an eye on the housing market, trying to find a house to live in. What we've seen was really pretty reasonable rates up until about 2018. You saw a pickup there, and then a takeoff in 2020. I've been looking at some houses that were sold in 2020 are listed now. They're 60% higher in value. They're listed for 60% more than they were in 2020, which is mind-blowing. But that's just the nature of what's happening. And you might say, well, okay, we've got the dark line here at the top. That's the state of Colorado. They're exceeding 500, just shy of 600,000 as an average price. Montrose is on this lower line. Or excuse me. Here we go. This line here. So we're seeing about 415 is kind of what the average has gone up to. One thing to keep in mind regarding incomes is it is actually as much or slightly more expensive when you compare it to the average income in Montrose compared to the state. So Incomes here aren't keeping up with the home values over time, so people say, well, it's way cheaper to live in Montrose. Well, that might be true compared to, say, Fort Collins. But at the same time, the incomes aren't keeping up with it. So it's actually more expensive to live in Montrose as a worker than it would be in some of the Front Range communities, which is a dramatic shift compared to what's been seen maybe 4 or 5 years ago. One thing to note, average sales prices, they have dropped. I don't know if we have realtors in here that might know more than me. But average prices have dropped in the last 6 to 8 months a little bit. They seem to have picked up in the last maybe 1 or 2 months. And that's not uncommon for kind of a pre-summer kick. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the summer going into the fall, if interest rates stay high, if that will actually hamper sales even further, or if we'll maybe just kind of stay at a flat level for a little bit. So it'll be good to kind of stay up with that. Rental costs, this is similar to house prices. Rental costs have gone up really kind of substantially since 2020. I'll say I was commuting from Grand Junction to here for a little bit. Then I moved in with my parents for a little bit. We live in Montrose because I could not find a rental for 5 months, which is crazy. Particularly one that would allow for a pet. So real struggle. It's a huge struggle for people trying to move to this city, to this area, because it's just really difficult to find anything that's available, first off, and then affordable. As you can see, kind of 3-bedroom units, they're pushing the $1,700 threshold. I'd say this, if you're looking at rentals that are hitting the market now, they're higher than this. So this is kind of looking at what people are currently paying, but anytime someone new is coming in, any of the new rentals are actually above what's shown here. Short-term rentals. This is a really interesting topic, particularly for Colorado. What this chart shows is that just the average rates that are being received for short-term rentals. As you can see, they've gone up. They kind of fluctuate seasonally. We don't have a major problem with short-term rentals. I'll say that, and maybe I'll say that caveat it. That's compared to other communities. You have Telluride, which is almost all short-term rentals. Crested Butte, similar thing. Gunnison has got a lot. We don't have a ton. I want to say that when Points presented this, they said about 1.5% of the housing stock is utilized in some capacity as a short-term rental. Those are pretty low numbers. The question is, will short-term rentals increase? They probably will, because you're seeing rental rates increase, and we have a very high occupancy rate, meaning that Airbnbs are booked, so short-term rentals are booked 77% of the time. So potentially an increase there. We are seeing a pretty steep drop-off in terms of price. Probably could be a factor of inflation. People are traveling less because everything costs so much more. But this is one really interesting thing that we're keeping a keen eye on. A lot of communities have put restrictions on short-term rentals. We are not there. I don't see us being there, at least not anytime soon. But some communities have really seen their long-term housing supply hampered by short-term rentals, and they just have no places for workers, basically. So getting into the community survey, as Phoebe mentioned, this was out earlier this year. We had 1,236 responses. Absolutely phenomenal rate. I think Points Consulting, when they first talked to us, they said 600 is probably, that would be a well-received survey. So 1,236, really phenomenal. 4.3% response rate from the City of Montrose, again, phenomenal. That's typically closer to 2%. So we're really happy with what we got. We had it in Spanish, and we had some public meetings with the Spanish-speaking community as well. on this to make sure that we really try to capture everybody's voice. So these are going to look a little confusing, so I'll try to cover them at just a high level as to what they reflect. But what's shown here is how satisfied are you with the cost to purchase a home in Montrose at the top, and then the cost to rent a home in Montrose at the bottom. What this shows is 57 and 62% say it's way too expensive. 17 and 30% say it's somewhat expensive. And then you've got about 15 to 20% that say, maybe somewhat affordable or not sure. So basically, 70 to 80% of people are saying it's just too darn expensive to live in Montrose. What types of housing would you like to see more of in the community? Workforce housing. Top choice is 622 responses, so really good response there. What workforce housing refers to, and this is kind of an interesting concept, is basically it refers to affordable units for the working population. There's kind of you can talk to 10 planners, you get 10 different answers on exactly what that means, but generally speaking, you want to spend no more than 30% of your income on housing, and that's kind of looked at as more of your workforce type, affordable type housing product. But yeah, 622, 501 said typical detached single-family homes. So people wanted to see more of what we have. But this is the primary inventory we have in the city is just standard detached single-family homes. That's kind of a staple of Montrose and a staple of the Western Slope. We want our space. That's why we came here. That's why I came here as well. And so that's still kind of a continuing trend, and not surprised to see that. Attached single-family housing, pretty high up there too. So that's townhomes, duplexes, fourplexes, things along those lines. Some of those could be maybe just for rent, some could be just for purchase, kind of like as I said on the front end. That was my first house actually, was a townhome to build a little bit of equity. And then it starts to drop off. We see, smaller market rate apartments, rent subsidized apartments, condos. Large apartments was actually lower on the list at 239. But as you can see, it's, across the board, a lot of interest in just more housing in general. This one's kind of confusing to look at, but what's kind of interesting is it shows basically longevity of residency here in Montrose, and then what the preferred housing type is based on that. So at the top we have folks who have lived here less than a year, and at the bottom 11 years or more, and then we have those bars in between. What's kind of interesting here is, single family is still pretty high. People who have lived here 1 to 5 and 6 to 10 years actually have some interest in apartments and townhomes and workforce housing, and a little bit higher on the spectrum than the top tier and the bottom tier. What's interesting here is the people who have lived here less than a year almost have an identical opinion to people who have lived here for 10 plus years, or 11 plus years. So kind of a fascinating slide to see there. So what tools would people be in favor of in the Montrose community to provide more housing? What we saw here is incentives for remodeling, redevelopment. We do, right now the city does provide some incentives when it comes to housing, particularly when it comes more to the multifamily type housing. There's some things that we can look at, but it's interesting. There's a lot of responses specific to that. Another one would be rent subsidized housing, which is the second highest. And what that could refer to is basically having some capacity to reduce rent for people so they can actually move here. That can also include kind of tax credit type properties and things along those lines. I won't go into the rest. Deed restricted, that's unique. That's more, you see that a lot more in mountain communities where it is just absolutely unaffordable until you're right the townhomes, basement townhome or a basement condo is $700,000. You see more deed restriction in those types of locations. What type of housing do you want to see built as the city grows? Again, single family, kind of standard detached single family, that was the bulk of the response. People want to continue to see what is being built now. But we did have some higher responses for townhomes, apartments, and kind of what's called classified as affordable. It's good to see that those numbers are high, that there's capacity for people to have interest in those types of units. Again, kind of circling back to the workforce and just general incomes here. If we want to have more medical workers, more retail workers, things along those lines, we really probably need more product like that missing middle type of housing that I indicated on the front end of this, just so they have an affordable place to live and they can actually relocate to this area. Now, this one is kind of interesting, and I'll tell you why. So neighborhoods, within the neighborhood you specifically reside, should Montrose work to maintain lower density housing or increase housing density? Everybody says, I want lower density in my neighborhood. So put those apartments elsewhere. Put those townhomes in a different location. This is the fun dynamic of being a planner, because you deal with these types of situations. I think the general population knows we need more housing, but it's tough. They don't want to admit that it should go close to them, and that's across the board. So where does it go? And I think that's the million-dollar question that I, as a planner, face on a daily basis, and have sometimes good conversations, sometimes really difficult conversations about this exact topic. But this kind of shows that mentality. This is not unique to Montrose. This is a standard. This would probably be a standard response in a majority of communities, I would say, particularly Western Slope communities. I won't go too much into this. What this really shows is we had open-ended questions on that survey, so basically people could just fill out, a sentence, a paragraph as to what they thought the city needed or what the issues the city was facing. Number one issue was housing affordability. No surprise there at the end of the day. But what this really shows to me is, people didn't just fill out the survey. They filled out the survey and then they actually put some thought into the opinions they wrote in some of those open-ended questions. And that's really encouraging to see. Points Consulting went through each and every question, tallied them up into these specific categories. But just good to see that overall response. I'm not going to go, I feel like I might be running out of time. So I can, if I don't have a script, I can ramble, I admit. I'm not going to go too much, I'll go through these quickly, maybe 2 minutes, and then I'll switch it to Q&A. But what we're going to see with the final product actually comes out is some recommendations from Points Consulting as to what we can do. There might be some things that are overreaching, and there might be some easy wins that we can do from a city level and also a partnership level with nonprofits and other organizations to see how we can solve a problem that, again, not isolated to Montrose, but I don't know that anybody has really found a solid solution to housing affordability, particularly right now with the current market dynamics. So here's some of those kind of preliminary recommendations. One of them is increase allowance of accessory dwelling units in more locations beyond just the redo district. Again, recommendation, these would have to be adopted by code with code amendments. That is not what we're proposing today. Allowing higher density potentially in some of the more medium high density zone districts. Again, we have 11 zone districts, so maybe retiring a couple of those, consolidating those within some other zone districts. Improvement of access to subsidized affordable housing in a number of ways. And then establish minimum density standards within particularly our higher density zone districts. So I won't cover those. With that, happy to answer any questions. I expect there to be a lot.
Are you really ready for this, Jace? Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause. the job. So, Eva, you have a question?
Okay.
So when a developer comes to you and proposes affordable housing, are they required to look at what affordable means in this community to the working class and make sure that affordable in this community really meets those standards for what they're going to build?
I think it's a good question, right? Because I've seen this everywhere I've worked. Is developers will say, "Hey, I'm going to build an affordable product for your community." They come in, and then what's built is actually just a market rate product that the general workforce community can't actually afford. When it comes to land use regulations, we don't have a ton of authority to say you have to cap your rents, you have to do this, you have to do that. Now, that's one of the recommendations. Recommendation 4 is to look at how we can actually do that, how we can negotiate that. Some communities have gone down that route, but we don't, with just general land use, kind of use by right scenarios, we don't have authority to do that. So we give I'll say we give the developers as much information as we can to say, here's what we're at income-wise, here's what we're looking at. But when it comes to market rate specifically, not a whole lot we can do on that front. That being said, when it comes to tax credit properties, so an example is the residences of Dry Cedar Creek, which is soon to be under construction. They're required by state to actually have rent caps, and so they would look at area median income and say 20% of residents cannot make more than 40% of the area median income. They have another 20% that can't make more than 60, 80. One thing that is just a constant issue, and it's what I call kind of a wicked problem, has no easy solution, is this missing middle housing, and not necessarily referring to one of the first slides I showed, but the missing middle from an income standpoint is those folks that make about 80% AMI and 120% AMI. They're really struggling, and that's the hardest part. And I think that's what we'll focus on from a staff standpoint, and look for city council direction on as well, as to how do we hit those markets? What can we actually do? So
good. Thank you.
Hopefully that kind of answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, market rate is a lot different here than it is other places.
Sure.
I know, Jim.
Two quick questions. In your discussion, does affordable mean subsidized in reality, in effect?
No.
The other question is just, and I saw a number of surprises in your presentation. How many presentations did you do, including the one here a couple months ago, just telling us and handing out the survey clue? How many pitches did you make to community groups?
To answer the first question, so affordable doesn't always mean subsidized. It can mean subsidized, but it doesn't have to mean subsidized. It really means, can people afford to live? Can they pay 30% of income and have a place to live, basically? And we don't have a lot of units like that here. I think that's what it showed. We have a lot of single-family detached. We don't have a lot of townhome product or other things. But in short, to that answer, no. To the second question you had, we did a very robust kind of pitch, I'll say. We pitched it on our utility bills. We pitched it in front of multiple community groups. We had a Spanish-only speaking meeting at MATA to try to really capture the Spanish-speaking community. We went around to mobile home parks, we went around to businesses, not just on Main Street, but everywhere. So we really tried, that was the goal, and that's why it was open for as long as it was. We wanted to capture true public opinion, true public thought as much as possible. And I think that the response rate shown, it captures that. Could we hit more people? We always could. We always hear that, no doubt. But I think we did a really good job on this one.
So, Jay, in addressing the missing middle, the city doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle room to assist developers. I think the one in progress right now, the base camp apartments are part of the Mura, and you're able to do the, help with the flat work and things like that. And a lot of people forget that the city does not collect property tax, right? So in talking to developers, have you had any discussions with the county about working with you on doing some type of temporary reduction in property tax for new multifamily developments?
Phenomenal question. We've got Talmadge in the back that probably he doesn't want me to call him out. But no, it's something that I think we can certainly look at. Again, how do we incentivize? Because that is a great point. We do not collect any city property tax on residential, and that's a struggle sometimes. Is that we don't gain tax revenue. Now we gain it in other ways, of course, because we have a strong, robust employment, and we have more people that are actually shopping. But that's something that I think, as far as the recommendations go, that's something that we want to continue to look at. We want to partner more because to that exact point, how much does the city really have control on? I think we need really strong partnerships with nonprofits, with the county, others, to see actual mechanisms that we can hit that missing middle.
So I think you're missing the demographic you're talking to. 7% was a great interest rate for most of my life, and most of these people's life. But we didn't see anything below 7% until the 90s or into the 2000s. I mean, that was 7% was a great interest rate. I mean, I'm on my 14th house, and I had very few houses that were at 7%, and none of them were less. And I think what people want and what, the not in my backyard syndrome, our demographic is tending towards seniors, and seniors, 1 in 4 seniors have no savings. So what people want and what people need are quite two different things. And I think there's another missing middle with demographics with seniors. Seniors, they either have their housing or they have to go into one of these assisted living or independent living. And sometimes it's quite a leap, even quote independent living. You often have to buy meal plans with that, whether you eat them or not. It's quite a change from living independently to quote independent living. And there needs to be more affordable housing for seniors also, like the Region 10 CASA project. And I wanted to know, what does it mean, a minimum density?
I think all good points. I'm not sure which ones I should capture here. I'll start with interest rates with a quick sentence on that. Absolutely, we've my generation's been fortunate on interest rates. That said, home prices didn't go up, between the 70s and the 2000s like they have in the last 20 years. So that's really exacerbated things. But no, we've been fortunate, particularly about 2 years ago. So on to senior living. Yes, I think there's no doubt a shortage in specific senior living, whether it's assisted living or kind of that quasi-assisted living, where it's actually you're living in an independent unit, but within kind of an assisted living type of area. And I think that we'll see more need for that over the course of the next 10 years or so. So I think that's something that's hugely important to look at for our community as well. And then lastly, when it comes to minimum density, what that would refer to is right now in our zoning code, we don't have a minimum density threshold, meaning an R4, our high density zone district, could have, let's say a 5-acre lot, it could have somebody could build one single house on it. A minimum density threshold would basically refer to the fact that it has to, a development has to be between, let's say, 5 and 20 units per acre. So it doesn't just kind of take those large swaths of land and have them reduced from a density standpoint. Because when it comes to density, you have infrastructure that generally exists in higher density zones, and you want to capitalize on that. You want to capitalize on that in terms of not using more of the taxpayer dollars to expand major lines, major services like that. So it's really kind of looking at that infrastructure and being smart with that infrastructure. So, again, that's not something that is being proposed with the code amendment or anything right now. I want to make that very clear. Some of the recommendations you see, again, might be overreaching. Some of them might be easy wins. I think the final report will kind of tell the tale.
I have a question regarding ADUs, additional dwelling units. That's kind of new for Montrose, and if I'm correct, you're allowing it within the core of the downtown area. What kind of attitudes are you seeing regarding the ADUs?
I think it's a good question. I think it's something that we, if we did expand on the ADUs, we would want to do more education on it, because I think we're seeing a lot of interest, particularly, obviously, it's only allowed in the downtown area right now, but a lot of people want to live downtown, and rent downtown, whatever it might be, so that's, I think that's of interest to a lot of people. That said, I've heard the other side of it of, I don't want an ADU in my single-family residential, maybe kind of more suburban style development. Totally respectable as well. There's no doubt about that, so I've heard that side of things, and that's why I think when we look at potential expansion of ADU locations, maybe we focus in on really specific locations or expansions of downtown areas, or looking at higher density areas or areas that are well served by utilities. But it will be an educational, there will be a big educational component to that with the community at the end of the day.
All right, I hate to tell you this, but we're done. We're come across the.
Wasn't too bad.
Actually, Jace, I thought I'm going to put on my Barbara Bynum geek hat, and I tuned in last night to the city council meeting, and they had a big, long, extensive, informative on what's happening in city planning, and it was very, very interesting. It's so interesting that Eva, you came by the house, and that's where I was deep diving into, like, don't talk to me right now, I've got to listen to this. So